One little pickup from last time when I was referring to my division of the truth and the inclusive truth, an example, for instance, wherein in exclusive truth you not only take what seems to be the immediate reality to you, but you have to add all possible known factors which may be in direct conflict, such as the example of your mother saying, "Why don't you come visit?" and you say, "I don't want to come visit," would be the truth, to use my example, in many people's cases, allegedly. The inclusive truth would be that you're aware of the fact that she wants you, or that she's going to say that she wants you to come visit. Why don't you come visit more often? And the inclusive truth would be, as I put it to you, to say, "I would love to come visit. I enjoy coming visit." In case it did not strike any of you immediately, which by now you should be able to think in those kind of very devious ways, to do this correctly may only involve a verbal reality. That is, for you to tell, to continue the example, for you to tell your mother, "I would love to come visit. There's nothing I enjoy more," whether you ever do it or not. Because that may be all it takes, just to stay with that one example. But if you get real good, you'll be surprised how many times that's all it takes. Because your mother, I don't want any of you to get involved with imaginary or three-dimensional psychological theories, but it would very likely could be that your mother says, "Boy, why don't you come visit?" And she doesn't particularly care if the basic energy was known or whether you come or not, but it's part of a dance that you and her are doing, a transfer of energy, that she knows that she says, "Why don't you come visit?" You go, "Ah," and then it starts that. And she go, "Well, other kids come visit. They live as far away as you do." "Yeah, but I'm working 2 jobs. "Well, that's all right. My sister, you know her son, he lives 200 miles from here, and he's working 3 jobs. So it may be that she just wants that. But that's not your problem. It's never your problem if you're trying to do something exceptional. It is to go ahead and to use the inclusive truth, to take what the other person says they want, or what the other institution, what the situation seems to demand, and you have to include that. And so it may be that you never have to go see your mother, but you simply tell her, you include her truth. And her truth, as far as you can tell, take the surface of it, because the truth you're dealing with right now is the verbal truth. If you're the one saying, "I don't want to come visit," you're dealing with a kind of verbal opposition to it. And so her truth is, she says, "I want you to come visit. I miss you coming visit. I find fault with the fact that you don't come visit." And so you include in the truth, "I would love to come visit. There is nothing I enjoy more than coming to visit you," whether you ever go visit her or not. Some of you might also suspect that there is a way that you might use this with yourself, but I certainly don't want to go into it, because I think there are laws in this state about talking about such matters. But to start into the new week, I wanted to try and get some of you to consider a kind of short history of a neural subversive, this kind of stuff, and the historical opposition. Because I was going to get into some more areas of opposition anyway. But there has been, just to give you almost off my head kind of progress that you can see in the three-dimensional world of the kind of opposition that has been to this, or vice versa. This has always been a part, a special part, it may be very small and it might be almost invisible, but of life's inner turmoil. But it's been a kind of opposition. I could describe it all kinds of ways, but let me cut it up verbally like this. That it started off going from fear of the natural world / superstition. You could say is the first kind of opposition. You can look at it either way, of this kind of activity, opposing that. If you can imagine, if you want to play these kind of acceptable anthropological games, a few little cavemen and cavewomen somewhere, and everybody else is out worrying about, as they claim, that they can find traces of people going through all kinds of rituals because they believe in the winter that the sun's about to move away and will never come back, and they're all frightened. And they go through all kinds of turmoil, and suddenly a priest shows up, or a guy with some snake oil in the back of a truck, and he says, "Trust me, I can make the sun come back." And sure enough, it comes back, long about the first of the year, although they didn't know it was the first of the year back then, I guess. But somewhere, off in some cave somewhere, probably not unlike this, there's 1 or 2 guys sitting around, and I'm not going to tell you what they knew, but I'll tell you this: they knew that the sun wasn't going away. Or if you don't like that, even if they didn't know that the sun wasn't going away, they knew this. They knew going out there and drinking that snake oil or staying on their head or spinning around and crying out some kind of something in Latin and lighting candles, they knew that that isn't what brought the sun back. Or if you don't like that, even if they didn't know that that's not what did it, they know that the guy that told them that that's what would work, they knew that he didn't know what he was doing. And so therefore it's the same thing. So you had a natural state of internal opposition within life itself that you could say went from, for me to arbitrarily define it that way, the first one being fear of the natural world and superstition, and the next stage you could see as being religion. And none of these, by the way, have gone away any more than just because of the sun, or just because now it is 9 o'clock in Bermuda and it's only 8 o'clock here. That doesn't mean that the sun's gone away, or it doesn't mean that 9 o'clock's gone away, or it doesn't mean that 8 o'clock's gone away if you move further. And so the opposition on the basis of superstition, as always, has not necessarily gone away because all time zones continue to coexist. Comma. So you can see the next stage as being religious opposition. That is, superstition sort of got itself organized and became religion. And so then it was religion opposed this, not necessarily actively, but there was always that. And so then once you had the people sort of cleaned up and you had the snake oil salesman wearing funnier clothes than they did originally, you had some guys sitting somewhere and some women sitting somewhere knowing that this is not what it purported to be, that they were part of a special inner turmoil. Then you could see it going past that, to use that kind of sequential, what you got to do talking. You could see it as then being in opposition to the state, the body politic, the king. Then you could see it going from there to science, which I won't go into because there's no great consequence. Then you could see it sort of going into psychological opposition, self-opposition, that especially in the 20th century in our part of the world, you have had, not at the total expense of religion, of superstition, of the state, because they still quite comfortably coexist, but it then began to be, in part, a feeling that oneself was the dominant force. It was no longer the king, it wasn't a body politic, it wasn't necessarily economic factors, it certainly wasn't superstition to many people. It was now my own psychological makeup. And so that would be in opposition to this, or vice versa, this in opposition to that. And to bring it more up to date, I would tell you that now it's not yet codified or verbalized in a particular way, but now the opposition is one's own brain chemistry. They're just beginning to play around, but I'm not in the business of prognostication, since that is an even more thankless task than being a priest or a weather forecaster. But I'm just saying in general that right now that is the kind of marshland where the opposition would be a little more defined if it were a little more defined. But that's what is hanging around now, is they're beginning to, life is beginning to have some people, some voices, stray more and more away from the idea of man's psyche being, quote, psychological, and as they like to say nowadays, among other things, that there is more and more statistical suggestion that our brain chemistry, in fact our genes, may make up our psychology, our psyche, more than we would like to think. I don't know why they always throw in more than we'd like to think. Well, I do, I just didn't want to go into it. The reason they don't want to think about it's the very reason that you would think that nobody wants to think about it. In some countries, I guess it would be known as to give you a severe case of the blues if you didn't have any other way out. There is a problem, quote, for someone attempting to do this. There is a problem always of having no clear threatening opposition, no clear threatening enemy, be what ordinary people might want to call it. And there is a specific problem publicly of something like this, and I'm using problem very advisedly, but there is one certainly privately with individual people doing this. Some of you, I'm sure would almost get a chuckle if I was going to say that part of the problem with some of you is that you have not enough clear internal opposition. That is, that almost anyone who is able to survive to find this interesting past the first 30 seconds, much less to stay on for years, you end up, and you can go ahead and chuckle because some of you I could chuckle along with you, but you end up being pretty much of a John and Jane decent Q public citizen. Now I know that many of you consider yourselves, even if you fit that description, or you wouldn't argue, you would consider that you're still a wolf in a citizen's clothing, and I know that. But there has to be a kind of level to do this that you should be aware of by now, that you can't be really nutso. In fact, if you're interested, some of you should be, but the real heroes of this kind of stuff are not historically recognized. Now I know that history has all sorts of figures that apparently represent this kind of activity, and I'm sure that many of you thought, and parts of your nervous system still are convinced, that somebody here and there was involved with this. But the real heroes you never hear of, for one very good reason. Because the real heroes of this, whatever I mean, the real people that were doing this, the kind I'm talking about, the original cavemen, the ones that cavemen now fighting against the growing opposition of one's own brain chemistry. The real cavemen had no real redoubtable inner demons that they publicly exorcised through speeches or books. But notice the rest of them did. The ones that are famous, it's always, the 40 days in the desert, or the 7 days wrestling with demons, or Satan, or that they were just misused by their family, or they were out there trying to tell everybody the truth, and all their local people just laughed at them and threw rotten kumquats at them. And they had to always be talking about the dark night of the soul, even before the 19th, 20th century French philosophers. But the real heroes of this, not dissimilar to what I was inferring with you people, are not all that nutso. There is a kind of, you can always consider, since I even use terms like, for the time being, of real revolutionist or neural subversive, that they're not exactly what they appear. But at that kind of, let's just say the appearance level, just the operational level, you cannot be really tormented by the kinds of ordinary demons, which are just the way you're wired and primed up to life did to you, but you may be a very vocal, self-proclaimed seeker of some kind of great truth, some kind of extraordinary activity, which they're the ones that make up followers of all kinds of cults and religions. But all of you that's been around more than 30 or 40 seconds, you should realize that you can't really be all that nutso. You can't really be that much tormented. Now I know everybody's tormented a little bit. Psoriasis or headaches, or you got a bad back, or for years you thought you should be famous and recognized, and you're kind of beginning to get over it, or maybe some of you even began to understand that book, that new hit that I mentioned to you over in that other planet, that The Making of a Saint, how to destroy your testosterone level, or how to deplete it. I'm sure some of you have found it surprising how much more of a decent human you become the older you get. The more inclined you are to be faithful to the person you're living with, and less likelihood there is that you might have 2 or 3 drinks 2 or 3 nights in a row. Just, you become a better person. At any real rate, what I was going to point out, there is a lack in a certain way with people properly drawn to this, people that can seem to get the most out of it, that they are always a little off-center, because then you can say everybody's a little off-center, but they're a little off-center, but not enough to be off-center that it matters much, that you end up being pretty square, you end up being pretty bland and dull compared to what many people, many of you, dreamed you were originally. And so it produces a certain kind of problem, because there is less and less apparent opposition. But you just more and more seem to have your own brain chemistry profitably or pleasurably massaged by this, and you seem to find that there's less and less to really sweat about. But there is a certain problem to that. There really is. Unless you just enjoy this. I mean, if you want more, you got to have more problems. And the thing is, people the more they are properly drawn to this, whatever the hell I mean by that, the less of those kind of personal problems and demons they have. So I hate to say, or I hate to even hint that you got to go out and look for trouble, so I won't do that. Of course, I don't have to, because trouble is always... It's just that most of you now are to the point that you look around, it's always little small demons. You know. I just don't have time for this anymore. I'll go take a nap. But one way, for those of you that are hearing this, that you might consider this, you get to a certain point, and rather than being saddled or limited by just simply your own personal demons or the lack thereof, as I'm inferring now, is you can just use the whole multifaceted, multi-potentialed, complex life of dance, the dance of life itself, of everything, not just on the basis of whether you any longer have any particular demons inside of you, or whether you feel that there's any particular systematized or fairly random just opposition to you out in life, just bad luck, people always in your way. If there doesn't seem to be much of that, it's just consider the complexity of life, of all the other people who are having problems, and all the little problems that now may seem to you to be almost minuscule, but if you think back a year ago, some time ago, they were big deal problems. It's like then sort of trying to dance with all of life simultaneously. An inclusive dance, not a private dance. It's that you can take everything in life that from an ordinary view might appear to be positive, or some combination. But you can take it all as either being absolute opposition, that is, even stuff you like, stuff you agree with, or that it's none of its opposition, which is, of course, the same thing. But is be able to dance with it all, but you've got to see it as though life is either going to lead or I'm going to lead at any particular time, and it's no longer a matter that I like the partner, or it's no longer that I dislike the partner. Is you have to use it all. You have to use even that which may apparently be, if not jumping and hopping agreeable, at least you find it all to be tolerable. But you can use that. Once you just find it tolerable. You should eat everything on your plate. Don't just eat the stuff you like, and of course don't just eat the stuff you don't like, unless you're really intent on being a saint. And then be sure and right if you get work. It would be only the most bland, the most gravity-bound person that could actually, and of course now I'm referring, we would assume to people that could think a little differently, would only be the most ordinary who would feel badly about life. And I know all of the hardships of life, and I know all the unfairness of life, but on an individual basis, once somebody begins to be able to think beyond the ordinary level, you have got to fall back to being just a walking example of blandness, crudeness, and if I may be so bold as to say dumbness, to feel bad about life, especially today. So I'll go into my Baptist preacher. Well, it was just this afternoon I was thinking. No, they don't say that though. They always say I was on my knees praying. You know, they don't ever say anything about thinking. I guess that'd be the first step to being excommunicated. If Baptists knew what that word meant. If anybody knew what the word meant. But what I was going to say is think about what a great life it has become, even in you people's lifetime. Life more and more, even as we're here now talking and taping, life more and more exempts the more civilized you are, which we're right at the cutting edge, believe it or not. In case any of you got any reason to feel blue, there it is. But consider that daily, at the very least, there are absolute signs of it. Life is more and more relieving individual, sophisticated, intellectual people of any blame to what appears to be their shortcomings. In your lifetime, it has gone. Nobody's responsible now for Some of you people are old enough, just a generation ago, 20 years ago, to be a drunk was to be an outcast. I mean, people whispered about it. And now it's a disease. To be a criminal, to be a mugger is no longer. You may, have to go do some public works out in the park, or you may have to pay a fine, or I don't know what, turn in your skateboard for a week. But being a mugger now, being a criminal, having a record, what kind of deal is that? You're relieved of the responsibility, and this is not for you people out there on tape. This has nothing to do, as always, with anything that you know about. The examples I may be using has nothing to do with the judicial system. It has nothing to do with sociology. It has nothing to do with crime, blah, blah, blah. And if you think it does, I'm wasting my time anyway. So back to it. Nobody's responsible now, more and more, I say nobody, for being a mugger. You're not held responsible. There is no blame for being a dope addict. I would say, pushing it, if any of you want to follow it, I can tell you how advanced life is. They're just little glimpses of it. Life is more and more relieving people of the blame of being dumb. Even in our country, which I've got to tell you mechanically is the cutting edge, we have one of the highest elected officials in our government. Just genetically. If you got any eyes, you should look in the dictionary under dumb, at least one that was published in the last year, and there would be this man's picture. And yet they're now, well, life now has groups of people, not just with political vested interests, which apparently they would have, but it's explaining away how this grown person, and you notice they're now asking, life is even having, coming out in the state, in the government, of them wanting people putting themselves up for public office to agree to drug testing. But notice, no one has ever said a word that candidates should take an IQ test. For you people on tape, I'm telling you again, that is not sarcasm, it's not an attack on society or politics, but consider the way life is arranged, that even here, the most intellectually driven part of life's body right now on this planet. And they never question. They won't know. We want these people to know whether they're taking drugs, or we want to check into their finances. We want their tax returns made public. But they never say, well, why don't we? This man is going to stand a good chance of being elected our governor, our senator. Could we not just have these people take just an ordinary IQ test, some kind of SAT, a college, and just see what kind of intelligence they got? Not education, a general IQ test of what kind of intelligence. How do you think? Back to the main road. I was literally trying to get you to see something. It would take the crudest, the blindest sort of person nowadays not to be, in a certain way, you should just find life to just be exceedingly cute, thoughtful, progressive, that more and more what was always just in your lifetime that you should recall. The youngest of you here, things that were looked upon as being character flaws. That is, that you were personally responsible for being addicted to diet pills, or for drinking, or for engaging in criminal behavior. That was the end of your life, and now it's not. It's probably the beginning of you getting some kind of government grant. You may be able to write a book, get on the talk show circuit, but life, surely none of you will let your own humor blind you to what I'm saying, is life less and less holds individuals responsible, verbally. That it is relieving people of individual blame. That you can't help being that way. It's not your fault for being addicted to a drug or alcohol or to sex or to violence, to criminal behavior. Being dumb. It's not your fault. Of course, it's not yet to the point, is why I said they cannot really define the new area of opposition as actually being your own brain chemistry, because it's not, as all of you know, you read enough, it's just kind of hit or miss of them saying, well, yeah, you're that way, you're an alcoholic, or you're... I know that sometimes it seems as though intellectually perhaps you're a few steps behind your peers. There's some evidence that suggests that some of this could be genetic. We don't know enough yet. But it's like, don't give up all hope. Don't take it personally. If all your friends keep looking at you and say you're dumb, of course you're not real dumb or you wouldn't know that. When you're real dumb, you don't know that anybody is talking about you. But life is, think about it, I wasn't going to give you a punchline tonight of that, but that life more and more, not in the most backward or the eastern work zones, the conservative zones, it is in the more intellectual, the more technologically advanced areas of the planet that people, which from one sense, if you can follow this right quick for another aside, from one view, they should be the first ones to say, what's going on here? That is, for people to start staying up, which is life, but people to start staying up and say, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with being a dope addict. I mean, it's antisocial and it can get people into trouble because it can lead to crime, but it's not some kind of flaw. The people can't help it. Now, from one view, this is really an aside, but if you can hear, it's how complex life is and how balanced it is. From one view, that should only be able to fly in the cruder parts of life's body, that is, on this planet. That should be the almost illiterate, only that would go for that. To try and pull that from one view, in this part of the world, the more sophisticated should be the first ones to go, no, no, no. No. Show me the evidence. Show me any proof of this. And yet this is the only place that it is flying. So think about what life's doing. If this all falls apart or you drift away, at least the kinds of things you were worried about one time, more and more do you have less and less chance of being held responsible for what you do, for what you cannot do. Now you've got to look at that being a real thoughtful life, because there are reports that there's some lives at other places that are not near that considerate. But there's some parts of life right now in other time zones, of course, they're not that considerate, to where if they catch you taking drugs, they cut off your neck. Well, maybe that's the second time. Maybe the first time they cut off your stomach. But at any rate, you know. Robbery, a hand, and all that. There is another example that has nothing to do with what it sounds like, but I'm going to start off. There is an area of the law known as the theory of agency. That's not really the point. I'm just going to give you the surface of it. But it has to do with very important matters, whether you know it or ever thought about it or had occasion to think about it. It has to do with the relationship apparently between an employer and an apparent employee. But it's known as the question of agency. That is, what kind of relationship did go on. It becomes of specific importance if you were hit by a Coca-Cola truck and you figure, oh boy, I'm going to sue Coca-Cola because I'm hurt and they got all the money in the world. And then Coca-Cola says it was 6 o'clock at night and this man goes off of work at 5:30. He didn't bring in the truck. He stopped and had some beers and he was off driving off on his own. He was not doing our work. He was no longer working for us. There was no agency involved between us and him at 6 o'clock at night and him out drunk. That had nothing to do with his job. Such as that. But it becomes a little more refined. Trust me, it's not anything to do with the law, but it's another reflection, as always, of what goes on in life, and it's just a prime example, amongst others, that struck me again about what I'm talking about. The subject hadn't changed. But the question of agency, it comes up, and they have to prove it. And the normal questions they ask of, was this person an actual employee? It even happens at tax time. Some of you may have been through. The IRS have their own definition. They call it the difference between an employer, where there was a direct agency, or an independent contractor, which for a while, a generation ago, was real popular. People trying to gather their tax by claiming I'm an independent contractor. The questions, even the IRS uses something similar, but the question as to whether there was a direct employee, employer, or agency involved between two people, or an institution and a person, or between two institutions. The general questions, the first ones were, did the subordinate, the would-be employee, does the would-be employee control their work time, their means, and their method, or does the so-called employer decide the time and the means and the method? Now, if it is the former, you would have an independent contractor. You could not call, from one view, you could not call it direct agency. My question to you was, what kind of relationship do humans have with life? Now, we're all toiling. You can't get away from it, even if you're laying down under a tree and just swelling up. You are toiling for life. But now, are you a direct agent for life? Or are you an independent contractor? Is it possible? Does life care what hours you work, how you do it, as long as you get results? Now, if it's that, you have an independent contractor relationship. An independent contractor, if I got this or made it a little too obtuse, would be like a real freelance, totally on commission salesman that Smith & Wesson Encyclopedia Company says, yeah, you can work for us, and they give you some brochures, they make you give them the printing costs, and they say every time you sell a set, we'll give you 20% of the gross amount. And you say, well, you know, when do I start? And they say, anytime you want to. What hours shall I work? You know, don't bug us. Go sell some. When you sell some, come here, bring us the money. We'll give you the books, and we'll give you back 20%. Next. That is results-oriented relationship. That would be a true independent contractor, that the apparent principal has no control over your time, does not tell you when to work, what days to work. It does not tell you how to go about it. If you say, how should I sell these suckers? Any way you want to. All we care is you bring us an order. Now, we're not here to teach you of salesmanship. We had an ad in the paper that said salesman wanted. Go fake it. In other words, they don't tell you how to do it. They don't tell you when to do it. They're only looking for results. That's all. Which would you say is an ordinary person's relationship with life if it came to that? If we could step outside the system and there was some cause for at least a threatening legal action, and someone was trying to accuse you of actually being an employee of life, and you said, no, not exactly. If you tried to take just a general little skimming I was doing, how are most people related to the work that life demands? And if you can get a little bit better, how are you related to your own intellectual processes? Because that seems to be where you're getting the knocks on the door and the information about, well, I should do so-and-so. Do you wait for something to say, well, it's about time you thought that, because we're going to start at 8 o'clock in the morning and you're going to work at this until 5? Or do you operate on the basis of, yeah, I should get this done? And it seems to be after that that nobody particularly cares, and nobody keeps bugging you about, are you working on this constantly? Are you devoting enough time each and every day? Or is it like a voice periodically just wants to check in? Are you finished yet? Have you done it? There is another aspect in the question of agency. And they're trying to prove it one way or the other. One of it is, or specifically having to do with whether you're an employee as opposed to an independent contractor, is how is the subordinate paid? Are you paid as you go along, like a weekly check? Are you paid just on the basis of when the job is done, like a real salesman? The real commission salesman, Smith & Wesson, you can't keep going around to them and say, hey, I hadn't sold anything, I've been out working real hard. You say, could I have an AV, an advance? They go, we don't do AVs. Next. Well, when do I get paid? When you sell something. When you sell it and you get the money, you get to keep 20% of it. That is how you're paid. But an employee, if the IRS can get hold of you or under the right conditions under a legal action to prove a certain kind of agency relationship, if it can be shown that the principal, that is the so-called employer, is paying you on some kind of schedule that will pay you like when the work's getting done a little bit, then you're on shaky ground insofar as claiming that you have any independence of your own action. So now I ask you, how does life pay people? When do you get paid for all you do? Well, whatever your payment is, you may be wired up that your payment that you look for would be called psychologically, is to have your brain chemistry affected in such a way periodically that you feel miserable, suicidal, or just generally depressed. At least every week you feel kind of depressed so that you know I'm getting somewhere. At least I'm getting paid. I'm not falling behind. It scared me last week. I went 3 or 4 days and I wasn't depressed. Where's the check? And life said, it's in the mail. Don't worry that you feel good now. You'll be depressed by Friday. You go, all right. I believe life. Life wouldn't lie to me. Well, how about even more specifically? How do you get paid in this? As you go along, or in one lump sum when it's over? I guess it might be good that we don't go into that, because then someone might want to know how you'll know when it's over. And of course we don't have Yogi Berra or Casey Stengel here to tell us. I could present one more question that's very much outside any judicial considerations or legal theories. Would be to ask you this musical question. Are we all, or especially people doing this, you got that? Are we all, or especially people doing this, vicariously responsible for everything? Forget any kind of arbitrary, isolated instances which happen in everybody's life. Many people, it seems to happen daily. But instead of any instance that you've got to defend yourself, or those kind of accusations where they appear to come from without or from within, as to, am I responsible for what's going on? Am I actually an employee here? What if everybody's being held vicariously responsible for everybody else? Or what if people doing this are specifically being held vicariously responsible for everything? Not just everybody else, but everything. Would you not see that as being, I would say, a formidable opposition? If you're being held, if you had any sensation of this, if it became your own understanding that I am, forget anybody else, forget any legal action, forget any theory, forget any philosophy, forget any even apparent input from the out there, that I begin to see that I am being held vicariously responsible for everything. You no longer have to look for demons. You no longer have to worry that my testosterone level is getting so low that I may become a saint before I ever really find out what the hell's going on. I may just mellow out before my brains actually blow out and expand. If you were being held, you personally, it could only be individually, if you're being held vicariously responsible for everything, then you have to look no further for any opposition. That would be the dance with all of life itself. It's no longer a matter of, quote, opposition. It's no longer just a matter of, quote, things I don't like. As long as I started the legal skid, before I really do us any damage, I'll get us out of it. But there's another aspect I bet most of you never have heard of, because at first blush it denies what you would expect. And it's tied directly to this. Just another reflection. In this part of the world, Anglo-Saxon law, it is forbidden to allow testimony. Let's say it's a case, but somebody has been damaged. You were in a hotel and you walked over to a balcony and you leaned on the railing and it collapsed. And you fell down, you hurt yourself, now you're suing Hyde or whoever. Testimony regarding remedial action taken after it, that is, that you think, well, hey, I went back the next day or as soon as I got out of the hospital and they had a work crew up there in the middle of the night fixing that banister. Ha ha, wait till I tell my attorney that. We'll get some pictures showing if they fix that immediately, because they knew it was bad. They were up there trying to repair not just where I fell, but they were checking all the way down there. And I saw them up there. They're going around and shaking it. And you'd think, there is proof. The testimony is not allowed generally. There's hardly any exception to that. They will not allow testimony showing that some kind of remedial action was taken subsequent to some dangerous situation causing injury. Now, at first, if you hear that, you might go, well, that's not fair. But the legal theory is that to do so would discourage people from actually making necessary improvements. Think about it. That if it was true, that if they would allow it, then the hotel's not going to go back. They're not even going to look at the end of the railings. You know, if somebody comes to them and say, I heard if somebody fell through the railing, they're like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And say, don't you think you ought to maybe go check them all? They're certainly not going to, because to check them all, if it's going to be admitted as testimony, would be a kind of insinuating proof that you would try and put to a jury of, yeah, them telling you it wasn't their fault it broke. How do you explain this? We got film. We went there 2 hours after my client fell out. And not only they were repairing that one, which of course they had to, but they had workmen on overtime up there. Look at it. You can see them up there shaking all these balconies, checking all the bolts. If that were true, if they'd allowed that, then no one, a landlord, somebody had a faulty piece of equipment out in public, nobody would go back and fix anything because they'd know it's going to be held against me. So, testimony regarding improvements, remedial action taken, even if there's no question that damage was done, a dangerous situation, it won't be allowed. Can anybody believe that this has something to do with your own nervous system? Well, I would suggest to you that a real revolutionist would not allow himself to testify to himself about any apparent improvements or changes he made. He would not allow himself to testify to himself as to, well, I've straightened up that problem, or at least I've made some improvement. Do any of you ever find it funny, besides, I guess, as strange as I can come up with examples, of things that you never thought about in a certain way, and yet there is a reality to it in your own individual nervous system, or it would have never come out publicly. It would have never come out in any kind of institutionalized way. It would not come out whatever field it is now labeled as, whether it be political, economic, religious, any. If there was not a reality at the level of the individual nervous system, it would not come out. There would be no need for it. It would have no validity. It would have no use. You know, it's bad enough, if I may stretch it, it's bad enough for a person to try and tell what they did, such as I made some change or I've improved myself. Now, that's bad enough, but there's something even badder. I knew you'd give up. What's badder is giving the reasons why. If I suggest to you that a real neurosubversive would not allow testimony even to himself as to improvements I've made, if he wouldn't do that, then what's 2 times wouldn't do that? Well, I'll leave it to you people who finished past math in high school. But 2 times that would be what somebody would refuse to do insofar as giving any reason why. And there's a reason why. Unless you want to give me another split second to think of a synonym for reason. But there's a reason why. The basic, as we mentioned many times, is no system can adequately explain or describe or analyze itself from its own level. So therefore, ordinary consciousness, 3D thinking, cannot find any 3D explanation for anything that happens. That is, no reason. Now, it does come up with reasons, certainly. Well, here you are in the gutter drunk again. Why? Well, yeah, you're right. Well, what's the reason? Well, all right, I'll tell you, there is a reason. And then they go into why the reason is. My wife left me, or she returned, whatever it is. But the reasons for anyone attempting to get past local, unreasonable explanations. The thing about any systematized view of the system itself. That is, of the ordinary intelligence, old intelligence trying to view itself. Any system attempting to see, analyze, explain itself at its own level. What comes out as reasons, I'll give you a small garden, you can pick the ones you like. They're dissatisfying, the reasons, disconcerting, and at the very least, or worst, or best, confusing. And yet they're presented as reasons. But if you know what you're doing, not only would you not allow yourself to testify as to improvements you've made. Yes, I was on a dangerous course. My balcony was about to collapse. I was coming apart at the seams, some of my concrete, some of the joists were just falling apart, but I took action. You can't testify to that in a court of law after damage. If you know what you're doing, you would not allow yourself to testify internally to that. And moreover, not only would you not testify, not only would you not talk about improvements or changes you've made, but if you couldn't do that, at least you'd do this. You at least would not entertain any ordinary inquiry, such as from yourself or any other person. Why did you do that? Or for you to think, why did I do that? And many is the time we have been doing these tapings, and I have tried to offer you the suggestion that to do this kind of activity correctly, there is no reason why. So you certainly can't look for it here. The closest reason why is, I like it. Which if there's a better reason than that, you should be Pope John III or whoever's next. But that's the only reason. But notice that is not the reason people give in life. That is not an acceptable reason. The kind of reasons given in life are always attempted local explanations of the universal, as they attempt to study man the species by them limiting and defining man the individual. And you cannot explain the universal through local examples, not with local intelligence. You got to be able to use examples if you had to, or the kind of stuff that we're doing now about legal theories of agency, that it does not have to do with individuals. It was not to sharpen some acts that any of us had against some attorney or the legal system or some case. Or the reason I brought this up, one of my neighbors is suing me. Let me tell you what happened to me. See, that's always the case. Nobody seems to notice it. There's nothing wrong with it. But everybody from the Pope on down, everybody, all leaders, everybody is describing when they get into something that seems to be really passionate, it's always on the basis you're going to find out that they have a local interest in it. That it has to do with man, the individual. And if you get really good, the more passionate they are, you can trust the fact that they're not even talking about man, the individual, they're talking about them, the individual. Attempted local explanations of universals are simply another way of me describing the difference between attempting to study man as a species as opposed to man an individual. As long as you're attempting to take man as an individual, you are left somewhere within that kind of unsatisfying quagmire that goes all the way from superstition and fear of the natural world, such as our caveman ancestors, which are still in caves. They hadn't all been covered up by lava and the ice age. Some of them are still down. Well, you don't have to know geography. I'll put it this way. Everybody raise their hand that knows where your pelvis is, or the lower part of your spine. They don't have, I don't think, well, most of you, as interesting as those cave paintings that they do in parts of France that they've discovered, but you have still got the caveman alive and well. And so you've got somewhere between that kind of swampland, quicksand between fear, superstition of the natural world, which always, if I lost you again, always includes death for the ordinary people. All the way from that up to the point now, even if you don't see it as brain chemistry, but the ordinary sophisticated people now see it up to the point that the opposition to me is myself, my psychological problems. Within there, within that spectrum, to try and come up with a local explanation for any of it, you should know by now, is just simply fruitless. If you belong doing this kind of stuff. There are no local explanations that are in any way satisfying. There is no way to properly study man the individual. It's a hobby if you got nothing else to do. Your TV's on the fritz. But insofar as it's explaining anything, man the individual is not going to explain anything, because the only intellect that will attempt to study man the individual is old intelligence. It's the only one that is locked into that system. That feudal system is always, of any system, attempting to explain itself from its own level. It's impossible. That's even spottily known here and there out in the ordinary world now. They don't apply it yet to human activities, or at least human intellectual activities. But they're already running across those kind of, quote, problems in the world of information retrieval, kind of complex communication networks going on, trying to build, and as a matter of fact, what they keep wanting to refer to as artificial intelligence. They just can't see really what the specific area I was pointing out, but it's that any system, including man, don't worry about some computer, but including man's own brain at the ordinary level, cannot analyze, cannot study itself, cannot see itself, cannot explain itself from its level. So to believe that they're going to build a machine that can do that to itself, well, you can see it just opens up just almost unlimited potential for a hobby. Fun. One thing about the kind of explanations, though, of ordinary people giving the reasons of them attempting to take remedial action, to change themselves, to improve themselves, even should you see yourself that the reasons do not satisfy anything outside of ordinary intelligence. They will not satisfy any new virgin part of your own brain. But what it does do, these wordy attempts always, even as though they may be classified, or be subject to be me saying that they are dissatisfying, disconcerting, confusing, all such wordy attempts do one thing, though. They continue to prepare man for even more inexplicable coming attractions. So from a view that is not, of course, subject to being seen, the more dissatisfying, the more confusing at a real energy level that all reasons and explanations of human life are, for me to say it one way, which with ordinary intelligence that is not really seen, disregarding the fact that there are people that rail out against being alive and complaining about the activities of man, still there is no real understanding out in life that all explanations, all reasons are unsatisfying. See, they would take it to a local level. They'd say, well, now that's true in some instances, but there are some things that are satisfying, and then they'd begin to mention however they're wired up, that perhaps certain parts of their religion, certain part of their so-called cultural background, certain part of their individual beliefs, and blah, blah, blah. And yet, you can begin to see, not from any individual view, not from your own view of you the individual, not from any view of other people as individuals, that all three-dimensional explanations are unsatisfying by their very nature, because no system can analyze or explain itself from its own level. So even that being true, that still does not mean that there's something amiss of all the talk going on and everybody explaining themselves, and people rush from one talk show to another talk show, and one time they're the victim, the next time they're the accuser, or they're a psychiatrist, and then they rush to another show next week, and they're now part of a show of psychiatrists who are now under treatment. And so the guy was an expert last week. Now he's here under some other guys. All I was saying is that from one view you can go, Jesus, the noise, Babel did not get wiped out by the flood. Babel simply expanded and they changed the name to planet Earth. Give me a break. That all this is a waste of time, and it's not. Because even if you get the view, even if you get a clear glimpse that from a quite real, more complex, more compound view, that all three-dimensional reasons are unsatisfying, that doesn't mean anything. Because even if you say they are, just notice it's continual preparation for what's coming up next to ordinary people. Because what's coming up next is going to be anew inexplicable. It's going to be anew confusing, disconcerting. And so what better preparation than to have explanations for what's going on now to be unsatisfying and confusing? What better preparation could you want? And you, as I said, if you don't realize how kind, how considerate life is, as long as you're going to be confused tomorrow with some new stuff, what better thing to do than to confuse you now? But what if it went ahead? What if it went ahead and life suddenly dropped somebody down that said, all right, listen up quick. I'm going to be here a little while, and I'm going to tell you people everything that's wrong, everything that's been wrong, and I'm going to tell you what the cosmic forces wanted. I'm going to answer all questions. You don't even have to ask me because I know what they are. And so the guy goes, blah, 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 and he tells it all. And he satisfies everybody, and the whole world goes, my goodness. All right, what if that was true? And then the guy says, well, I got to go, and he leaves. And then things go back in the same kind of course they're going. Like for a day or so, everybody thought, phew, I feel so good because now I understand what's going on. But then life continues to go in the way it's going now. That is, within a day or so, new stuff has arisen, and now you're becoming again confused, a little uncertain, and within a week, 10 days, a fortnight, everybody's back in their same old position. Now that would be inconsiderate. So life does this. Life gives present explanations that are unsatisfying and confusing because it has your best interest at heart. Well, it's not my business to tell people exactly how to behave, but if any of you were decent sort, some of you would drop life a card and just every now and then say that I'm just slowly becoming hip to what you're doing, and I appreciate it. Doesn't cost much.